Hi, this is Angela with Coulee Environmental Safety Training, and I'm going to be talking with you today about confined spaces, specifically the proposed rule changes to the confined space regulations for general industry in 2018. A printed version of this talk can also be found at Coulee Environmental Safety Training's website, our Facebook page, and LinkedIn account. Links to those are available below. You may have been aware that in 2015, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration changed the rules for confined spaces in construction. These rules went into effect August 4th, 2015. The final rule imposes additional and more stringent regulations for confined spaces on construction or building sites than previously existed in the old OSHA standards. The new standard now includes crawl spaces and attics and other such spaces that were previously not covered under the confined space rules for construction. What does this mean to you if you are in an industry that is not construction? As the confined space regulations are written in Washington State, the confined space rules for general industry are the same as for construction. They're found in WAC 296-809 Safety Standards for Confined Spaces. Therefore, changes that were made to OSHA's confined spaces and construction rules affected both construction and general industry in Washington State. The Department of Labor and Industry is in the process of finalizing these changes to Washington's safety standards for confined spaces to meet the new federal standards. The new rule is projected to be finalized late 2017 or perhaps early 2018. The stakeholders meeting has taken place in May of 2017, and the period for public comment will end July 14th, 2017. This paper is based on information provided by Labor and Industry prior to the May stakeholders meeting. The first changes encountered in the proposed new confined space rules is the addition of a number of definitions of terms in the chapter. Terms such as competent person, control, energy isolating devices, entry supervisor, hazard elimination, limited or restricted means of entry or exit, physical hazard, and qualified person have been added. Now, while this is not a full list of the additions to the definitions, these are some of the terms that were previously not listed and that often presented a level of uncertainty for employers trying to follow the confined space rules. Other definitions have been even further expanded and clarified within the regulations. The proposed new rules have also added a program administrator position to oversee permit-required confined space program development, coordinate implementation of the program, and conduct required evaluations of a program's effectiveness. Another addition is a requirement that testing equipment must be capable of identifying increasing atmospheric hazard levels in the event a ventilation system stops working. There's also a requirement that if a rescue team has been requested by the entry supervisor, the team must notify the entry supervisor in the event that the rescue services become unavailable. This supports the current requirement that the employer must make sure they have adequate rescue support or adequate rescue and emergency services available during permit-required confined space entry operations. Along the same line, language that the entry supervisor's means to contact the rescue service is always operable, and that the supervisor will be notified as soon as the service becomes available or has become unavailable, has also been added. Perhaps the biggest change is the removal of the requirements for non-permit confined spaces throughout the chapter. In fact, 296-809 700 were the requirements for a confined space to be considered a non-permit confined space, and how to reevaluate a non-permit confined space if a hazard develops has been removed. The term non-permit confined space has instead been replaced with alternate entry procedures. Essentially, companies must treat all confined spaces as permit-required confined spaces until hazards have been eliminated and the spaces meet alternate entry requirements. While this is not a big change from the previous rules, the documentation for this determination has had some changes. Under the proposed new rules, all entries will require either a permit or an alternate entry documentation. The alternate entry procedure will apply when the only hazard remaining in the space is a potentially hazardous atmosphere that can be controlled by the use of forced air ventilation. To use the alternate entry instead of an entry permit, employers must do the following and document in an alternate entry documentation form. Employers must show that they are able to eliminate unsafe conditions and hazards by implementing alternate entry procedures. This includes removing entrance covers safely, promptly guarding the opening with a railing, temporary cover, or other temporary barrier to prevent accidental falls through the opening and to protect entrants from falling objects into the space using hazard elimination procedures. Employers must certify that pre-entry measures have been completed and the hazard elimination procedures on the documentation required for the entry have been implemented. They also must make sure the pre-entry certification is available to each confined space entrant before they enter the confined space. Before an employee enters a confined space, they must either check the calibration date on the instrument to ensure that calibration is within the manufacturer's specification, or if necessary, complete a calibration check or functional test of the instrument with a known traceable gas test mixture. The results of the calibration must be recorded in the log, and you must ensure that you have the correct gas sensors for the instrument for the hazardous atmosphere that you are concerned about. Test the internal atmosphere with the calibrated directory instrument for all of the following in this order. First, test for oxygen content, then the presence of flammable gases and vapors, then the presence of potential toxic air contaminants. You must be able to provide the entrants or their authorized representatives with an opportunity to observe this pre-entry and any periodic testing that occurs for the confined space work. If you are required to use continuous forced air ventilation, you must wait until the forced air ventilation has removed any hazardous atmosphere before allowing entrance into the space. The forced air ventilation must be directed towards the immediate areas where the employees are or will be, and continue to ventilate that space until all employees have left the area. You need to make sure that you are providing the air supply for that ventilation from a clean source and make sure it does not increase the hazards in the space. This means basically you want to make sure that the air that's being drawn from and blown into the confined space does not contain any other hazardous components, such as from an idling vehicle that may be nearby or any type of emissions that might be coming from the facility itself. It should be clean air. You want to make sure you test the atmosphere within the space as needed to make sure hazards do not accumulate. within the confined space. If a hazardous atmosphere is detected during entry into a confined space or while work is being conducted within that confined space, you must do all of the following. You must evacuate employees from the space immediately. Evaluate the space to determine how the hazardous atmosphere developed. Then implement measures to protect employees from the hazardous atmosphere before continuing the confined space operations. And then you need to verify the space is safe for entry before you continue in the operations as well. Any written documentation concerning the confined space hazardous atmosphere, or if there was an issue with the atmosphere that was resolved, all of that written documentation must be available to each employee who is going to be entering the space or to their representatives, and it should also be placed at the confined space bulletin board as well. Confined spaces occur in many industries, like aerospace industry, breweries, wineries, construction, food processing and storage, chemical processing, electrical power generation, manufacturing, municipal and public utility systems, gas stations, and waste treatment, just to name a few different industries that often have confined spaces. Confined spaces may have many geometric configurations, sizes, and uses as well. For example, tanks for storing or processing liquids, pressure vessels, sewer systems, septic tanks, underground utility vaults and chambers, open-top tanks, vats, secondary chemical containment, trenches, storage bins, silos, and hoppers. Again, just to name a few of the different types of confined spaces. While the new proposed rule will add another layer of administration to confined space entry for some industries, hopefully it will prevent deaths and injuries to workers when entry is made into confined spaces that are incorrectly assumed to be safe. There are far too many accidents that involve workers perishing within or near confined spaces due to the assumption that the space is safe for the improper training.